Hey everyone, this is a summary for Chapter 5 on becoming a shock. And the introduction to this chapter starts off with the fact that punishment is emotionally grounded when it's in regards to taking vengeance, meaning that when we want revenge for something, when we use punishment, we're usually using our emotions, not our mind. We're not using any kind of logic. It's just our feelings and emotions when it comes to taking vengeance. And the purpose of punishment is to control unwanted behavior, which includes destruction, aggression, and immorality. So punishing bad behavior is supposed to teach good behavior, like when we discipline children by spanking them. However, punishment does have its side effects that prove more destructive than beneficial in the long run. So some of the side effects of punishment. Non-coercive alternatives are necessary because they are not accompanied by all the various side effects of punishment. This chapter talks about the ancient code of Hammurabi, which basically says that however a physician treats his patient, that's going to have the same effect on the physician. So if the physician does something to the patient where the patient loses a hand, then the physician will get the same punishment. So this is an example of the negative side effects of punishment, because even though it helped ensure the competence of doctors, it also caused them to focus on their own survival instead of their patients. So they would have this fear that would be so strong, that whatever happens to their patients would happen to them, that they would even stay away from patients altogether. Another example of side effects is mentioned by mentioning morphine, the thalidomide, and nuclear explosions. These all have, even though these help immediate issues like morphine for pain, I think the thalidomide is for nausea during pregnancy, it does have negative side effects in the long run. Okay, so he also talks about how new punishers are made. Certain events can act as punishers because of our experiences with the circumstances. Events that are usually neutral can also become punishers, even if they're not initially aversive. This is called conditioned punishers because it is conditional on other circumstances. And environmental factors are mentioned because they are huge when determining the likelihood of a behavior. Sensitivity to the likelihood of punishment is one example. So, example that the book uses is when drivers speed only when there's no police around. When they see a cop car in the distance, they drive the speed limit. So the cop being there or not will determine whether or not that driver is going to speed. It's the same thing when a child is cursing, and they only curse when adults aren't around, but if there's an adult present, they are less likely to curse because it will lead to punishment. So ultimately, the environment gains control over conduct. So he uses a lab rat example of pairing the light being on with getting food after pressing a lever. So the rat associates the light with food because the light controls the reinforcement contingency. So this is an example of an element in the environment gaining control by signaling a particular reinforcer. The light signals the food. In summary, an event that starts out neutral becomes a potential reinforcer as a result of previous experience with it. And the same concept applies to punishment. Otherwise, neutral events can turn into conditioned punishers. So for the lab rat, the light should now be able to reinforce or punish. I'm sorry for the typo. The laboratory rat can learn that pressing the lever will get it food, but pressing it with the light on will cause a shock. So what happens when we punish by taking away positive reinforcers instead of presenting negative reinforcers? It becomes a signal for punishment and a punisher in its own right. So the example that the book used was that schools have abandoned corporal punishment and replaced it with expulsion, which is the loss of opportunities to learn. So instead of spanking a child for misbehaving, we might take their favorite toy away. That's an example of taking away positive reinforcers. The significance of a conditioned punishment or punisher. An element that leads to punishment because of a punisher itself. So for example, if a child has been previously spanked for misbehaving, the signal of raising the hand will be enough to stop the behavior. However, these punishing elements have an extremely negative effect. When the number of these punishing elements keep increasing, we end up doing as little as possible because we are now too afraid of being punished. So if a student is punished in class, school is now a punisher. This means that instead of associating school with learning, they now associate it with coercion and therefore stay away from it. So the big picture, ultimately, conditioned punishment is an extremely harmful side effect of punishment. So what do we need to do? The book states that we need to recognize that people who use punishment becomes punishers, which will lead to hate, fear, and avoidance of interaction. So the social environment is a big source of conditioned punishment. And if we use punishment too much, our very presence can be punishing. And, we're gonna be very, I think we're gonna be very lonely if our only the only feeling that we give is a feeling of fear, because we're a conditioned punishment. We're not going to have many very interactions with people. So the book ends with this quote: "Anyone who uses a shock becomes a shock," which is pretty much the summary of the big picture of the chapter. So can you think of a time when an otherwise neutral event became a conditioned punisher? I guess the example I can use, so an otherwise neutral event for me is running down the stairs, or rushing out the door. But when I was pregnant, I fell and broke my ankle, and because I was rushing down the stairs, and every time after that, when I was rushing, I had continued to injure the same ankle. So now the neutral event of running down the stairs became a conditioned punisher. So now when I go down the stairs, I go 1 foot at a time and I go super slow. So that's my example. All right, thank you.